Welcome to the Debits W-9 and 1099 compliance training. I'm glad you're here. Whether you're managing 10 vendors or 10,000, getting W-9 forms collected and 1099s filed accurately is one of the most important and often most tedious parts of year-end compliance. In this training, I'll walk you through the entire workflow inside Debits, from requesting W-9 forms to tracking their status to exporting your data for filing. By the end, you'll know exactly how to handle every step with confidence. This training is designed for accountants, bookkeepers, and firm staff who manage vendor compliance. Let's get started. Before we dive into the software, let's make sure we're on the same page about the forms we're working with. A W-9, or Request for Taxpayer Identification Number and Certification, is a form the IRS requires you to collect from any U.S. vendor or contractor you pay $2,000 or more during the tax year. The W-9 gives you the vendor's legal name, tax classification, and taxpayer identification number, which is either a Social Security number or an employer identification number. A 1099 is the information return you file with the IRS to report those payments. The most common type is the 1099 NEC. That's for non-employee compensation. This is what you use for independent contractors, freelancers, and service providers. There's also the 1099 Miss C, which covers other income like rent payments, royalties, and prizes. And there are other types like the 1099 INT for interest income. The Debits platform supports all of these. The key deadlines to remember. January 31st is the deadline for furnishing copies to recipients. March 31st is the deadline for electronic filing with the IRS. Miss these deadlines and you could face penalties. That's why having a streamlined system matters. Let's look at how Debits makes this process easy. Let's start by navigating to the vendor dashboard. From the sidebar, go to a company under Bookkeeping, and then click the 1099s tab. This is your command center for W-9 and 1099 compliance. The dashboard shows every vendor for the selected company, along with their current status in the compliance workflow. Each vendor row shows the vendor name, their email address, the total amount you've paid them, their W-9 status, and their 1099 filing status. If you use QuickBooks, your vendors auto-populate here from your synced transactions. Debits pulls in any vendor you've made payments to, so you don't need to manually enter them. At the top of the dashboard, you'll see filter options. You can filter by W-9 status, like showing only vendors who haven't submitted their W-9 yet. You can filter by form type, 1099 NEC, MISC, and others. And you can filter by payment amount to focus on vendors above the $2,000 threshold. There's also a search bar to quickly find specific vendors by name. This is especially useful when you're managing hundreds of vendors across multiple companies. Now let's talk about how to actually request W-9 forms from your vendors. There are two ways to do this, individually or in bulk. For a single vendor, click on their row in the vendor list. This opens the vendor detail panel. Click the Request W-9 button. A modal will appear where you can verify or enter the vendor's email address. You can also add a custom message if you'd like, something like, "Hi, we need your updated W-9 for our records." Then click Send. The vendor will receive an email with a secure link to complete their W-9 form online. They don't need a Debits account. The link takes them directly to a guided form experience. For bulk requests, and this is where it gets really efficient, use the checkboxes on the left side of the vendor list to select multiple vendors. You can use the Select All checkbox at the top to select everyone on the current page, or pick specific vendors. Once you've selected your vendors, click the Request W-9 button in the toolbar. A modal will show you a summary of how many vendors will receive requests, and it will flag any vendors who already have a pending request. You can choose to send new requests or reminders. Click Send All, and every selected vendor gets their request email simultaneously. This is a huge time saver when you're kicking off the W-9 collection process for the year. But what if you don't have email addresses for all your vendors? That's where the Request Info from Client feature comes in. In the vendor list toolbar, click Request Info from Client. A modal will open where you select which client to send the request to, then choose which vendors need information. You can select all of them or just the ones you need. Add a custom message if you'd like, and click Send Request. Your client will receive an email with a link to a simple portal. They'll see a list of vendors and can provide the email address for each one. They can also provide additional details like mailing address, tax ID, and tax classification, or even upload a W-9 PDF if they have one on file. If the client only provides the vendor's email address, you can then send the W-9 request directly to the vendor through the normal workflow. This two-step approach is a great time saver when you're working with a new client and don't have vendor contact information. Let's look at what happens when a vendor clicks the link in their email. Understanding this will help you answer questions from vendors and troubleshoot any issues. First, the vendor sees a taxpayer classification questionnaire. They'll answer whether they're an individual or a business entity and whether they're a U.S. person or a foreign person. Based on their answers, Debits automatically routes them to the correct form. For U.S. individuals and entities, they'll complete a standard W-9 form. The form is broken into clear sections: legal name, business name if applicable, tax classification, like sole proprietor, LLC, C Corp, S Corp, partnership, or trust, their address, and their taxpayer identification number. The TIN field validates the format automatically, so vendors can't accidentally submit an invalid ID number. At the end, they review the IRS certification language and sign electronically. For foreign individuals, they'll be directed to a W-8 BEN form instead. This collects their country of citizenship, permanent residence address, foreign tax ID, and any applicable tax treaty information. For foreign entities, it's a W-8 BEN-E form, which asks about the organization type, FATCA status, and beneficial ownership details. There's also a PDF upload option for vendors who already have a completed W-9 on file. They can upload the PDF, and Debits uses AI-powered OCR to parse the form and autofill the structured fields. The vendor just needs to review and confirm the extracted information. This entire experience is designed to be simple and self-service, so you don't need to spend time walking vendors through the process. Back on the vendor dashboard, you'll see color-coded status badges that make it easy to track where every vendor stands in the process. Gray badges labeled Needs W-9 mean no request has been sent to that vendor yet. Blue badges labeled W-9 Requested mean the request email has been sent, but the vendor hasn't completed their form yet. Green badges labeled W-9 Received mean the vendor has successfully submitted their W-9, W-8 BEN, or W-8 BEN-E form. The information is ready for your review. You'll also see additional statuses as you progress through the workflow. Ready means the vendor is verified and ready for 1099 generation. Generated means the 1099 has been created, and filed means it's been submitted. To see more detail on any vendor, click the eye icon on their row. The vendor detail modal opens with several tabs. Click the 1099 tab to review their tax classification, form type, total payments, and W-9 status, including options to view the signed form or request an updated one. The Notes tab is where you can document follow-ups and vendor communication. Add notes to keep a record of phone calls, emails, or any special circumstances. This context is invaluable during reviews. If a vendor hasn't responded, you can send reminders in bulk. Select the vendors with pending requests using the checkboxes, then choose an action from the toolbar. Debits tracks how many reminders have been sent so you can escalate if needed. Once a vendor submits their W-9, it's important to review the information before proceeding to filing. Click on a vendor with a green W-9 Received badge to open their detail panel. You'll see all the information they submitted: their legal name, business name, tax classification, TIN, and complete mailing address. Check the TIN carefully. Make sure it matches the name on file. For individuals, it should be a social security number. For businesses, it should be an employer identification number. If something looks off, you can click Edit to make corrections. The Documents tab shows the actual form the vendor completed, whether that's a W-9, W-8 BN, or W-8 BEN-E. You can view and download the signed document at any time. If a vendor submitted incorrect information and you need them to redo it, you can invalidate their submission and send a new request. This resets their status back to W-9 requested with a note explaining what needs to be corrected. Take the time to review carefully. Errors in TINs or names are the most common cause of IRS penalty notices related to 1099 filings. Foreign vendors require special attention in the 1099 process. When a vendor identifies themselves as a foreign person or entity during the questionnaire, Debits automatically routes them to the appropriate W-8 form and flags them in your vendor list with a foreign badge. Generally, payments to foreign persons are not reported on a 1099. Instead, they may be subject to withholding under Chapter 3 of the Internal Revenue Code, reported on Form 1042-S. However, there are exceptions. If a foreign individual has a U.S.-based business or is performing services in the U.S., they may still need to be included in your 1099 filing. In the Vendor Detail panel, you can review the W-8 form they submitted, check their country of residence, and determine the appropriate tax treatment. If you need to reclassify a vendor, for example, if they were incorrectly marked as foreign, You can update their status in the vendor detail panel. When in doubt, consult with your tax advisor about the reporting requirements for specific foreign vendors. Before you export your filing data, take a few minutes to review the entire vendor list and make sure everything is in order. Start by checking for any vendors still showing a needs W-9 or W-9 requested status. Follow up with those vendors to get their information before the deadline. You can sort the list by status to see all outstanding items at the top. Next, check for duplicate vendors. This can happen when the same vendor appears under slightly different names. For example, John Smith Consulting versus J. Smith Consulting LLC. Debits will flag potential duplicates when it detects matching TINs across different vendor names. You can merge duplicates from the vendor detail panel. Review the payment amounts. Vendors below the $2,000 threshold for 1099 NEC don't need to be filed. You can exclude them by selecting the vendor and clicking Exclude. You'll be asked to provide a reason, such as below threshold or corporate entity. Speaking of corporate entities, C corporations and S corporations are generally exempt from 1099 reporting, with some exceptions like legal and medical payments. Review your vendor tax classifications and exclude those that qualify. You can also exclude individual transactions rather than entire vendors. This is useful when some payments to a vendor are 1099 reportable and others aren't. When your vendor data is verified and ready to go, it's time to export for filing. Click the Export button at the top of the vendor dashboard. A modal will appear with your export options. Debits supports 3 export formats. First, Track 1099. This is a direct integration that formats your data for upload to the Track 1099 filing platform. Second, Tax 1099, similar integration for the Tax 1099 platform. And third, CSV, a standard comma-separated values file that you can use with any filing service or for your own records. Select the form type you want to export: 1099 NEC, 1099 MIS-C, or another type. The modal will show you a count of how many vendors will be included in the export. Review the vendor count carefully. If the number seems off, go back and check your exclusions and vendor statuses. Click Export to download the file. For Track 1099 and Tax 1099 formats, you can upload the file directly to their platforms and proceed with filing. I recommend exporting a test file early in the process, even before all W-9 forms are collected, to verify the format looks correct and catch any data issues early. After you've submitted your 1099s through your filing service, come back to Debits to update the status. Select the vendors whose 1099s have been filed and click Mark as Filed. This updates their status badge to Filed and records the date for your audit trail. For bulk filing, select all applicable vendors using the checkboxes and click Mark as Filed in the toolbar. This is much faster than updating vendors one at a time. If you need to undo a filed status, maybe you realize there was an error and need to refile, you can click the vendor and select Undo Filed. This moves them back to the previous status so you can make corrections and re-export. Keeping your filed status up to date is important for year-over-year tracking and makes it easy to reference past filings during audits. Let's recap what we covered today. The complete W-9 and 1099 workflow in Debits follows these steps. First, navigate to the 1099s tab and review your vendor list. Second, request W-9 forms individually or in bulk. If you don't have vendor emails, use the Request Info from Client feature to ask your client for that information first. Third, track the status of each request and send reminders as needed. Fourth, review submitted W-9 information and handle foreign vendors. Fifth, prepare for filing by checking for duplicates, excluding exempt vendors, and verifying all data. Sixth, export your data in the format your filing service requires. And finally, mark vendors as filed to maintain your records. Here are some best practices to keep in mind. Start collecting W-9 forms early, ideally in October or November, before the year-end rush. This gives vendors plenty of time to respond and gives you time to follow up. Use bulk requests to save time. Sending requests one at a time is inefficient when you're managing dozens or hundreds of vendors. Review all vendor information thoroughly before exporting. A few minutes of review can prevent costly penalty notices from the IRS. Keep your vendor records up to date throughout the year, not just at filing time. When you onboard a new contractor, request their W-9 right away. And finally, if you need help with any part of this process, visit the Debits Help Center for step-by-step articles on each feature. Thank you for watching, and good luck with your 1099 filing season.